The first snowflakes of December drifted like forgotten memories over Arlington National Cemetery, settling on rows of white marble headstones that stretched into the gathering dusk. A sharp wind howled through the bare oaks, rattling the chains of the flagpole where Old Glory snapped at half-mast. Another soldier honored that afternoon. Most visitors had fled the cold hours ago, leaving the sacred ground to the dead and the ghosts who tended them. But one living creature remained. A German shepherd, his once proud frame whittled down by hunger and time, limped along the cobblestone path. His silver fur was matted with old blood and fresh snow, his paws cracked from miles walked on ice. He moved with purpose, ignoring the empty food wrappers near trash cans, the squirrels darting across his path. Every few steps his hind leg buckled, an old injury, poorly healed. But he pressed on. At precisely 6:30 p.m., the dog stopped before a grave marked Captain Daniel J. Hayes, U.S. Army. The dates etched below, 1989 to 2021, were nearly obscured by frost. With a grunt, the dog collapsed onto the frozen earth, his muzzle resting atop the stone as if listening for a heartbeat beneath it. His breath came in ragged puffs, fogging the marble where Hayes's name stared back, unseeing. This was no accident. No stray's whim. The dog had come here every night for months. Rebecca Myers tightened her scarf against the biting wind as she made her final rounds. A former Army MP, she'd taken this cemetery job after her own tour in Afghanistan, left her with a limp and a hollowed-out feeling she couldn't name. The dead, at least, asked no questions. Then she saw him. The German shepherd lay so still she mistook him for a statue at first, some tribute to K-9 units. But then his ear twitched at the crunch of her boots, and Rebecca froze. "Hey there," she murmured, crouching slowly. The dog didn't react. Up close, she saw the scars. A latticework of raised flesh across his shoulders, the jagged line along his ribs where fur refused to grow. Military working dog markings. She reached into her pocket for a granola bar. "You hungry, boy?" The dog's nostrils flared, but he didn't lift his head. Not even when she tore open the wrapper and let the scent of peanuts fill the air. Rebecca frowned. Strays always ate. Always. Over the next week, Rebecca observed the dog like a puzzle she needed to solve. Monday, she left a bowl of kibble by the grave. By dawn, it was untouched, covered in snow. Wednesday, a blizzard buried the cemetery under 2 feet of powder. Still the dog came, shaking off the storm like it was nothing. Friday, Rebecca brought a thermal blanket, draping it over the dog's shivering form. He growled low in his throat. Not threatening, but resigned, as if to say, "Don't waste this on me." Then there was Sunday. Rebecca arrived early, hiding behind a towering oak, as the dog limped into view. At 6:29 p.m. he paused 3 feet from the grave, ears pricked forward. The second the distant church bells chimed the half-hour, he marched the final steps and dropped onto the grave with eerie precision, like he's reporting for duty. On the 10th night, Rebecca tried something new. She wore her old Army jacket, the one with the 75th Ranger Regiment patch Hayes's unit had worn. The dog's head snapped up as she approached, his golden eyes locking onto the insignia. For the first time he stood, wobbly but deliberate, and sniffed the air. Then he did something that shattered Rebecca's understanding of animals. He saluted. Not the paw-lifting trick trained dogs did. This was slower, more human. His right front leg bent at the elbow, tapping his nose once before dropping back to the ground. A gesture so specific, so military, that Rebecca's breath caught. "Oh God," she whispered. "You're waiting for him, aren't you?" The dog, Ghost, her mind supplied, stared at her. In his eyes, she saw no plea for help, only a quiet, unshakable certainty. "I have my orders." 1. The burned dog tag. The next morning, Rebecca scoured the grave and found a twisted piece of metal half buried in the dirt. She pried it open, revealing charred but legible text. K9 Ghost, 75th, RR, Handler Hayes. 2. The Veteran's Recognition. At the VA coffee shop, a grizzled Marine dropped his cup when he saw Rebecca's photo of the dog. "That's Hayes's shadow," he rasped. "They said the dog died in the blast. But he must have... Christ. He must have crawled out." 3. The Unbreakable Pattern. Cemetery records showed Ghost arrived exactly 197 days after Hayes's funeral. The time it would take a wounded animal to walk from Afghanistan to Virginia if he never stopped moving. Rebecca dug deeper, uncovering Hayes's last mission report. K9 Ghost alerted to IED in compound. Radio comms failed. Hayes manually retrieved Ghost from blast radius but sustained fatal injuries. K9 status, MIA. A footnote added, Hayes's final words, "Tell Ghost he's a good boy." That night, Rebecca knelt beside Ghost in the snow, her voice breaking. "Captain Hayes is gone," she said. "Your mission is over." Ghost blinked slowly. Then he laid his head back on the grave, his breath fogging the stone in steady, even puffs. Not yet. Rebecca Myers had spent 23 nights watching the German Shepherd she now called Ghost endure blizzards, thunderstorms, and the bone-deep cold of Virginia winters, all without ever leaving Captain Hayes's grave for more than a few minutes. She'd tried everything. Day 4, a trail of raw hamburger meat leading to her car. Ghost sniffed it, then turned back to the grave. Day 11, a humane trap disguised as a cozy doghouse. Ghost slept beside it, curled against the frozen marble. Day 18, a recording of Hayes's voice, from a YouTube memorial video, played on her phone. Ghost's ears twitched, but he didn't move. Now, on Christmas Eve, with the cemetery closed and a historic snowstorm rolling in, Rebecca made a desperate decision. "I'm not asking this time," she muttered, pulling on Kevlar gloves. As Rebecca approached, Ghost lifted his head. Not in warning, but in what almost looked like recognition. His golden eyes tracked her as she knelt and placed a small, twisted piece of metal on the ground between them. The burned dog tag was barely legible, its edges melted from heat. But 2 words stood out in the dim glow of her flashlight. Hayes and 75th RR. Ghost's entire body stiffened. His nose twitched as he inhaled the scent of scorched metal. And something else. The last traces of his handler's sweat. His blood. His skin. With a whimper that sounded eerily human, Ghost lurched forward, pressing his muzzle to the tag. Then, for the first time in months, he stood on all fours and limped toward Rebecca's idling SUV. He wasn't following her. He was following Hayes's ghost. The storm raged as Rebecca sped toward Paws and Claws Animal Hospital, the only 24-hour vet in Arlington. Ghost sat upright in the back seat, his gaze locked on the swirling snow outside. Not with fear, but with the sharp focus of a soldier scanning for threats. Rebecca's hands clenched the wheel. "You know where we're going, don't you?" Ghost didn't react. But when they passed a billboard for Fort Myer Military Base, his ears pricked forward, and a low, mournful howl rattled the windows. He remembered. The vet, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s with a Support K9 Veterans pin on her lab coat, took one look at Ghost and froze. "That's a military working dog," she said, not as a guess, but as a fact. "Look at his posture, the way he scans the room before entering. That's training, not instinct." As Dr. Chen scanned for a microchip, Rebecca noticed 3 things. 1. Ghost's scars. A shrapnel pattern on his left flank, identical to the wounds described in Hayes's Medal of Honor citation. 2. His reaction to commands. When Dr. Chen absent-mindedly said, "Platz," German for down, Ghost dropped instantly, his body rigid. 3. The microchip beeped twice. Dr. Chen's face drained of color. "This chip is registered to the Department of Defense." The screen loaded. K9 Ghost Breed, German Shepherd Handler, Captain Daniel Hayes, 75th Ranger Regiment status, MIA, Kandahar, 2021. Rebecca's knees buckled. They listed him as missing in action, but Hayes's grave is right here in Arlington, Dr. Chen finished grimly. Which means this dog walked out of a war zone alone, crossed continents, and somehow found his handler's grave. She tapped another key, pulling up Ghost's service record. Trained in explosive detection, search and rescue, casualty extraction. Deployments: 2. Syria, Afghanistan. Last log: K9 alerted to 15-kilogram IED in compound. Handler Hayes retrieved K9 from blast radius. K9 sustained injuries but remained operational until evac. Handler KIA. Rebecca's vision blurred. Operational until evacuation. That meant Ghost had worked through his own wounds, trying to save Hayes, even as he bled out. "This isn't grief," Dr. Chen whispered, running a hand over Ghost's battle-worn fur. "This is a soldier who thinks his mission isn't over." As dawn broke, Rebecca sat on the clinic floor with Ghost's head in her lap, replaying the facts. 1. The timeline. Hayes died on June 18, 2021. Ghost arrived at Arlington on December 22, 2021. Exactly 187 days later. The average walking distance from Kandahar to Virginia? 7,000 miles. Even at 40 miles a day, an impossible feat for a wounded dog, the math was wrong. 2. The burned tag. The tag Rebecca found wasn't Ghost's. It was Hayes's, meaning Ghost had carried it from Afghanistan. 3. The behavior. Ghost didn't act like a pet. He stood guard, he saluted, he responded to German commands. "Dr. Chen," Rebecca said slowly, "what if he's not just visiting the grave? What if he's waiting for orders?" The vet's pager beeped. An emergency C-section for a Labrador. But before leaving, she handed Rebecca a folded slip of paper. "Call this number. Ask for Colonel Masterson. He was Hayes's CO." Colonel Masterson answered on the first ring, his voice gravelly with sleep, until Rebecca said Hayes's name. "Hayes's dog is alive?" The colonel's shock crackled through the phone. "We searched that damn compound for weeks. The Taliban swore they'd skinned him." Then came the bombshell. "Ghost didn't just find Hayes's grave, Lieutenant. He made it." Masterson explained. After the blast, Ghost dragged Hayes's body half a mile to the extraction point through enemy fire. When the medevac took Hayes, Ghost stayed behind, guarding the site until reinforcements arrived. His last known act, digging Hayes's dog tag from the rubble and clutching it in his teeth as he vanished into the desert. "We assumed he bled out somewhere," Masterson said roughly. "But that dog, he always finished the mission." Rebecca looked at Ghost, now sleeping on the clinic floor, his paws twitching as if running. Toward Hayes? Away from death? She'd thought she was rescuing him. But the truth was, Ghost had never needed saving. He just needed someone to listen. The National Military Canine Records Office smelled of old paper and gun oil, a claustrophobic maze of filing cabinets and dusty monitors. Rebecca Myers rubbed her temples as the archivist, a septuagenarian named Walter with fingers stained by decades of microfilm, slid a manila folder across the desk. Hayes's unit was Dog Company, 3rd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment, Walter wheezed. Their K9s were trained at Lackland. But this one, he tapped Ghost's service photo, a younger, brighter-eyed version of the dog now waiting in Rebecca's car. Special case, flunked out of patrol work for being too sensitive to handler stress. Got recycled as an explosives dog. Rebecca's pulse spiked. "What does that mean?" Walter adjusted his bifocals. "Means he didn't just smell bombs. He felt Hayes's heartbeat through the leash, knew when to push forward, when to pull back. They were syncopated, like jazz musicians. The folder contained 3 artifacts that would rewrite everything. 1. A time-stamped photo. Ghost and Hayes kneeling beside their Humvee. Digital clock on the dash reading 18:30, 6:30 p.m. Hayes was grinning, ruffling Ghost's ears. The dog's gaze, though, wasn't on the camera. It was fixed on something behind the photographer, his body coiled like a spring. 2. The after-action report. K9 Ghost alerted to IED at 18:32 via aggressive scratching. Handler Hayes initiated evacuation. Radio malfunction prevented alert to command post. Blast detonated at 18:35. 3. A handwritten note, found in Hayes's pocket post-mortem. 2 words. Ghost knew. Rebecca's hands trembled. 3 minutes. That was the gap between Ghost's warning and the explosion. 3 minutes Hayes might have lived if comms hadn't failed. And now, every night at 6:30 p.m., Ghost reenacted those lost moments. Not mourning, reliving. Tracking down Dog Company's sole surviving medic took Rebecca to a VA psychiatric ward in Bethesda. Staff Sergeant Mateo Rivera hadn't spoken in 11 months. Not since waking from his 3rd suicide attempt to find Ghost's paw prints in the snow outside his window. Until today. El perro fantasma, Mateo susurró, cuando Rebecca le mostró la foto de Ghost. His scarred hands sketched the explosion in the air. Boom. Then, silence. Ghost was on fire. His fur melted to Hayes's uniform where he'd tried to drag him. We pried him off to load Hayes into the bird. Last thing I saw? Ghost running back toward the blast zone, like he'd left something behind. Rebecca's throat tightened. His tags. Hayes's tags. Mateo's eyes glazed over. Numbers something louder. He handed her a charcoal sketch from his bedside table. A rendering of Ghost standing atop rubble, howling at a downed helicopter. In his teeth, not dog tags, but a mangled military radio. He tried to fix it, Mateo said, to call for help, even though Hayes was already gone. That evening, Rebecca took position behind the memorial amphitheater, 200 yards from Hayes's grave. Through binoculars, she watched Ghost limp to his usual spot, his movements slower tonight. The vet's painkillers were wearing off. At 6:28 p.m., Ghost began pacing, 3 steps left, 3 steps right, his nose pressed to the ground as if following an invisible scent trail. 6:29 p.m. He froze, ears swiveling toward the east. Rebecca strained to hear what he did. Then it came. The distant chime of the post-chapel bell, ringing the half-hour. 6:30 p.m. Ghost's body snapped into a perfect alert stance. Front paws rigid, tail straight. The posture he'd been trained to hold when detecting explosives. A whine built in his throat, crescendoing into a series of frantic short barks. The standard IED alert. But no one answered. So he did what he'd done in Afghanistan when comms failed. He dug. His claws tore at the frozen earth, not randomly but in a precise 6-inch square, the size of a radio's frequency dial. Dirt flew between his legs as he worked, his breaths coming in ragged bursts. After 2 minutes, he stopped abruptly, panting. Then Rebecca saw it. Ghost cocked his head, as if listening to a voice only he could hear. His tail gave a single, hesitant wag. And for the first time since she'd known him, he sat, the formal, straight-backed sit of a military dog awaiting orders. He thinks he got through. He thinks Hayes answered. Retired Master Sergeant Cole, Doghouse Wilson met Rebecca at the U.S. War Dogs Memorial, his own Belgian Malinois service dog, Duke, lying motionless at his feet. "Your boy's stuck in his final loop," Doghouse said, watching Rebecca's recording of the ritual. "See how he checks his 6 at 6:31? That's his post-alert sweep. Standard protocol after marking explosives. Clear the area for secondary devices. He pointed to the moment Ghost sat. That's the kicker. In training, we reward alerts with a good dog and a sit command. Hayes must have given that order post-blast. Ghost is waiting for it again. Rebecca's stomach dropped. So how do we break the cycle? Doghouse exhaled sharply. You don't. He has to. That's it? It's progress. Means part of him knows the mission's over. But until someone gives the formal stand down, he nodded toward the memorial's inscription. No one left behind. Even the dogs, Rebecca finished. Armed with new understanding, Rebecca returned to the cemetery at 6:25 p.m. the next night. But this time, she didn't hide. She wore her old dress blues. Ghost noticed immediately. His head jerked up, nostrils flaring as he caught the scent of military wool and boot polish. For a heartbeat, he looked younger, the proud, unbroken dog from the archives. At 6:30 p.m., as Ghost began his alert barks, Rebecca did what Hayes couldn't. She raised her hand in the ranger stop signal and barked, "Fertig!" German for finished. Ghost froze mid-dig, his entire body quivering. Then Rebecca gave the order Hayes had died trying to deliver. Mission complete. Stand down, soldier. Ghost's ears flattened. He took one stumbling step toward her and collapsed. Not in exhaustion, in relief. The Kandahar wind carried the scent of burning trash and damp earth as Captain Daniel Hayes adjusted his night vision goggles. Beside him, Ghost panted softly, his breath fogging in the desert chill. The dog's ears were pricked forward, his body taut as a coiled spring. 18:28 p.m. 2 minutes before the blast, Ghost suddenly stiffened. His nostrils flared, and a low guttural growl rumbled in his chest. A sound Hayes had learned to trust more than any radar. "Show me," Hayes murmured, unclipping Ghost's leash. The German shepherd lunged forward, his paws kicking up dust as he zeroed in on a seemingly innocent patch of dirt near a crumbling compound wall. He scratched violently at the ground. 3 rapid swipes, their trained signal for confirmed explosive. Hayes's stomach dropped. "Command, this is Delta 7. Ghost has marked an IED at checkpoint." Static hissed through the radio. "Delta 7, repeat." More static. Ghost whirled toward Hayes, his golden eyes wide with urgency. He barked twice, sharp, staccato warnings, then lunged at Hayes's leg, his teeth gripping the fabric of his pants, pulling him backward. 16:30 p.m. The ambush. The first bullet whizzed past Hayes's ear before he heard the gunfire. "Contact front!" Ghost didn't flinch at the shots. His focus was locked on the IED, his body vibrating with the need to do something. Hayes grabbed his collar, yanking him toward a nearby trench. "Live, Ghost! Live!" Then, the world erupted. The blast threw Hayes off his feet. Heat seared his skin, and for a heartbeat everything was blinding white noise. When his vision cleared, Ghost was moving, not away from the explosion but toward it. His fur singed, his left hind leg dragging. Blood streaked his muzzle, but his teeth were clamped around Hayes's radio, shaking it like a wounded animal. He was trying to fix it. Hayes's last conscious thought was to reach for him. But the second blast came too fast. Rebecca Myers sat cross-legged on her apartment floor, Ghost's head resting heavily in her lap. The dog's breathing was slow, his body still weak from the vet's surgery to remove shrapnel fragments. She scrolled through Hayes's letters on her laptop, emails sent to his mother, recovered from his archived account. One passage stood out. "Ghost isn't just a dog, Ma. He's my battle buddy. He knows Ranger means we're moving out. Mission means stay sharp. And home means, well, that's the one word he never listens to." Rebecca's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then she took a breath. "Ranger," she said softly. Ghost's ear twitched. "Mission." His muscles tensed, his paws shifting as if ready to run. Then, home. Nothing. Ghost exhaled through his nose, his eyes drifting shut. Rebecca's chest ached. Of course, home wasn't a place to ghost. It was a person, and that person was gone. The next morning, Rebecca drove to Fort Myer, Ghost watching the passing barracks with quiet intensity. She parked outside the 75th Ranger Regiment's K-9 training grounds, where a group of handlers ran drills with their dogs. The moment Ghost stepped onto the field, every military working dog within 100 yards stopped mid-command. A grizzled trainer whistled low. Well, I'll be damned. They know he's one of them. Rebecca knelt beside Ghost. Watch. A young private guided his Belgian Malinois through an obstacle course, barking, "Face! Attack!" The Malinois lunged at a padded sleeve, locking its jaws with practiced precision. Ghost didn't react. Then, "Search!" Ghost's head snapped up. His entire body quivered, his nose working the air. It was the first time Rebecca had seen him alert to something other than Hayes's grave. The trainer's eyebrows shot up. He's waiting for a command. Not just any command. His command. Rebecca's pulse pounded. She stood abruptly, squared her shoulders, and barked in her best drill sergeant voice. "Ghost, at ease." The effect was instantaneous. Ghost's ears flattened. His tail gave a hesitant wag. And for the first time since Afghanistan, he sat like a soldier, back straight, head high, eyes locked on hers with something that wasn't just recognition. It was trust. That night, Rebecca dug deeper into Hayes's files. Buried in his service record was a video log from the day before the ambush. The footage showed Hayes crouched beside Ghost in their tent, scratching the dog's favorite spot behind his ears. "Listen up, boy," Hayes murmured, holding Ghost's gaze. "If things go sideways tomorrow, your new mission is to live, understand? At ease, soldier." Ghost had licked his face. Now, in the dim glow of her laptop, Rebecca finally understood. Ghost hadn't just lost his handler. He'd been given an order he couldn't obey. Rebecca Myers stood in front of her closet, staring at the olive-green army jacket she hadn't worn since her medical discharge. The 75th Ranger Regiment patch on the sleeve was frayed at the edges, the fabric still faintly smelling of gunpowder and sweat. She hesitated, then reached for the second jacket hanging beside it. Captain Daniel Hayes's, loaned to her by his mother. The left pocket had a jagged tear from shrapnel, hastily stitched closed. "He'd want you to have this," Mrs. Hayes had said, her voice breaking. "Lord knows that dog won't come home without it." Rebecca slipped it on. The sleeves were too long, the shoulders too broad. But when she lifted the collar to her nose, she caught it. The scent of pine soap and something metallic, something unmistakably Hayes. Ghost would recognize it. She hoped it would be enough. Ghost was already at the grave when Rebecca arrived, his body curled into a tight ball against the marble. The moment her shadow fell across him, his head snapped up. Then, he went perfectly still. His nostrils flared, his black nose twitching as he inhaled the scent clinging to the jacket. For 3 heartbeats, he didn't breathe. Then he lunged, not at Rebecca but past her, his paws skidding in the dirt as he frantically circled the grave, sniffing every inch. His whines grew louder, more desperate, until he suddenly dug at a spot 6 inches from the headstone, his claws sending clumps of earth flying. Rebecca dropped to her knees. "What is it, boy?" "What did you find?" Ghost's muzzle reappeared, clutching a mud-caked dog tag in his teeth. He dropped it at Rebecca's feet with a clink, then sat back on his haunches, watching her with an intensity that made her hands shake. She wiped away the dirt. "Hayes, Daniel J. OPOS 75th, RR." And beneath the standard text, hand-etched coordinates, 34.0522 degrees north, 118.2437 degrees west Los Angeles. The VA hospital where Hayes' squad had been sent after deployment. The Walter Reed National Military Medical Center smelled like antiseptic and grief. Rebecca followed the signs to the physical therapy wing, Ghost limping beside her on a leash. Nurses stopped mid-step to stare, not at the dog but at the way he moved, his head high, his gait deliberate, like he was reporting for duty. Room 712 held Sergeant Javier Ruiz, Hayes's best friend and the sole survivor of the ambush. His legs were gone below the knees, his wheelchair parked by a window overlooking a barren courtyard. The moment Ghost crossed the threshold, Ruiz's coffee cup shattered on the floor. "Holy hell." His voice was raw. "They said you were dead." Ghost didn't wag his tail, didn't whine, just walked to Ruiz's side and rested his head on the man's thigh, his eyes locked on the purple heart hanging above the bed. Ruiz's hands trembled as he touched Ghost's scars. "You stupid, loyal mutt. You really did it." Rebecca held up the dog tag. "Do you know what these coordinates mean?" Ruiz's laugh was bitter. "Yeah, it's where Dan buried his last letter." He wheeled closer, his voice dropping. "After our first tour, Hayes made us all promise, if we bought it, we'd leave something behind. Not for the army, for the people. He said," Ruiz swallowed hard, "he said Ghost would guard his until someone worth giving it to showed up." Rebecca's breath caught. "And the coordinates?" "Where we got drunk the night before Kandahar. A stupid oak tree behind the barracks." Ruiz's fingers dug into Ghost's fur. "But that tree's gone now, so he put it here." He tapped the dog tag. "Right under his damn name." Midnight at Arlington. Rebecca knelt where Ghost had dug earlier, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The earth was soft here, disturbed too often by one determined dog. Her fingers brushed something smooth and cold beneath the soil. A Ziploc bag, covered in mud but intact. Inside, a faded Polaroid of Ghost as a puppy, his oversized paws splayed on Hayes's boots. 2. A handwritten note, the ink smudged by time and what might have been tears. "If you're reading this, boy, mission's over. You did good. Better than good. Now go home, eat the couch, steal mom's meatloaf. Live so damn loud it pisses off the neighbors. At ease, soldier." 3. A second slip of paper folded smaller. "To whoever finds this, thank you for bringing him home. The coordinates are for a locker at LAX. Keys taped under the bench where we watched the sunset. Tell Ghost. Tell him I'm proud." Ghost whined, his nose pressed to the Polaroid. Then, for the first time since Afghanistan, he licked it. A slow, careful swipe across Hayes's smiling face in the photo, like he was tasting the memory. Rebecca Myers woke to the sound of rain hammering against her window. An icy, late winter storm that had turned Arlington's roads into shallow rivers. She rolled over, expecting to see Ghost curled on the rug beside her bed, his ears twitching at the thunder. The rug was empty. At first, she wasn't alarmed. Ghost often paced at night, his old injuries aching in the damp. But when she checked the kitchen, the living room, even the cramped bathroom, no dog. Her pulse spiked when she saw the back door slightly ajar, the deadbolt undone. Impossible. Ghost had never once tried to escape. Not even when she'd accidentally left the gate open for hours. Then she spotted it. A single muddy paw print on the hardwood leading toward the door. Not the frantic scramble of a dog chasing a squirrel, the deliberate stride of a soldier with orders. Rebecca tore through Arlington in her truck, windshield wipers fighting the downpour. She checked. Hayes's grave, only fresh mud where Ghost had lain. The VA hospital. A night nurse swore she'd seen a big silver dog trot past the emergency room. Every 24-hour diner and gas station between DC and Quantico, nothing. Dawn broke gray and hopeless. Rebecca was about to call the police when her phone rang. "Ma'am? You the lady with the army dog?" A man's voice, thick with a rural Virginia accent. "I'm at the Greyhound station in Culpeper. Your boy's here, and, you're gonna want to see this." Culpeper, Virginia. Population, 20,062. A town Hayes had mentioned exactly once in his letters. Mom's azaleas bloom pinkest in May. Rebecca's truck skidded into the bus depot parking lot, where a heavy-set mechanic named Earl waved her over. "Damnest thing," Earl said, leading her around back. "I was hosing down the overnight buses when I see this wolf of a dog sitting at the stop, like he's waiting for the 7:15 to Richmond." Ghost sat perfectly still beneath the shelter, his fur plastered with rain and road grime. His paws were bleeding, his nose rubbed raw. But his eyes were clearer than Rebecca had ever seen them. "Tried to give him a sausage biscuit," Earl continued. "He wouldn't take it. Just kept staring down Route 29. Then he started walking and, well," he gestured to the scene ahead. Ghost limping down the sidewalk, stopping every few feet to sniff a fire hydrant or mailbox. A trail of bloody paw prints marked his path, and 50 yards behind him, a growing procession. A mail carrier with an umbrella, 2 middle school girls clutching their backpacks, an old man in a Korean War vet cap, all following silently, like pilgrims behind a prophet. The procession ended at a white clapboard house on Maple Street. Its porch swing creaked in the wind, its flower beds still winter bare, except for one bright pink azalea bush, the only one in bloom for miles. On the porch, an elderly woman in a faded housecoat stood frozen, her hands clutching the railing. "Daniel's dog," whispered Mrs. Hayes. Ghost climbed the steps with the last of his strength and collapsed into the azaleas, the exact spot where a teenage Hayes had posed in his football uniform, a photo Rebecca had seen on the mantel. The old woman sank to her knees, her fingers brushing Ghost's torn paws. "You found me," she sobbed. "Oh, you good boy. You found me." Rebecca turned to Earl. "How did he know?" "This town isn't on Hayes's dog tag. It's not in any military records." Earl removed his cap, revealing a 75th Ranger Regiment tattoo on his forearm. "Maybe not. But that bush? Dan planted it for his mama after his first tour. Told us it was so she'd always have something alive to tend." He nodded to Ghost. "That dog didn't follow a scent. He followed a promise." As Mrs. Hayes tended Ghost's wounds, Rebecca noticed something odd. The azalea's roots were partially exposed, the dirt disturbed in a perfect 12-inch square, the size of a standard military ammo box. Her shovel hit metal within minutes. Inside the rusted container, 1. A childhood photo of Hayes and Ghost at puppy training. The back scribbled, "First command he learned, find Mom." 2. A sealed envelope labeled, "For the one who brings him home." Mrs. Hayes's hand shook as she read aloud, "Mom, if you're reading this, Ghost walked through hell to keep his promise. Don't let him guard my grave. Make him protect your roses instead. Love, Danny." Ghost, lying at her feet, gave a single thump of his tail, the canine equivalent of orders received. Mrs. Hayes's hands trembled as she pulled the faded Nike shoebox from beneath her son's childhood bed. The room hadn't been touched since his last leave, a fossilized shrine to a boy who never came home. A dusty football trophy sat beside a framed photo of Ghost as a puppy, his oversized paws splayed across teenage Hayes's lap. "The Army sent his personal effects," Mrs. Hayes whispered, lifting the lid. "But this was in his locker at Bragg. His friend Javier smuggled it to me." Inside lay 1. A dog-eared copy of Where the Red Fern Grows, Hayes's favorite book, with "Read to Ghost," chapter, 7 inches scribbled in the margin. 2. A Ziploc bag of fur clippings, labeled "First Grooming, save for tracker training." 3. An ancient flip phone, its battery swollen with age, Rebecca's breath caught. "Does it still?" Mrs. Hayes pressed the power button. By some miracle, the old Nokia logo glowed to life, followed by the shrill alert, "One new voicemail." The phone's tiny speaker crackled with the sounds of another lifetime. Helicopter rotors, shouted orders, the metallic clink of gear. Then Hayes's voice, younger than Rebecca remembered but unmistakable, filled the room. "Hey Ma, if you're getting this, well," awkward laugh. "Guess I owe Ghost an extra large steak. Listen, I need you to do two things for me." A burst of static. When Hayes spoke again, his voice was tighter. "First, tell Ghost mission complete. Go home. He'll understand. Second," long pause, "don't let him guard my grave. That's not his job anymore." The recording ended with 3 words that shattered Rebecca. "Love you, boy." Not Ma. Boy. A message within a message. Mrs. Hayes pressed a hand to her mouth. He knew that dog would outlive him. Rebecca waited until 6:25 p.m., the golden hour, when the setting sun painted Arlington's headstones in hues of fire. Ghost walked beside her, his gait steadier since Culpeper, though his muzzle had gone fully gray. She stopped at Hayes's grave and knelt, the flip phone clutched in her sweating palm. Ghost sat automatically, his posture perfect, the disciplined sit of a soldier, not a pet. "Ready?" she whispered. Ghost's ears twitched. Rebecca hit play. Static. Rotors. Then, "Mission complete. Go home." Ghost's entire body locked up, his pupils dilating until his eyes looked almost black. For 3 heartbeats he didn't move, didn't breathe. Then he circled the grave 3 times, slow, ritualistic, nose skimming the grass as if following invisible tracks. On the 3rd pass, he paused at the headstone, his wet nose brushing the engraved dates, and sighed. Not a dog's sigh, a man's sigh, the kind Hayes might have made after a long patrol when he finally unlaced his boots. Ghost's muscles unclenched all at once, his battle-stiff posture melting as he folded onto the grass, his chin resting atop Hayes's name. Rebecca expected him to close his eyes. Instead, he watched the sunset, his tail giving one soft thump as the sky burned orange over the Potomac. For the first time in years, he looked peaceful. Rebecca returned at dawn, a thermos of coffee in hand. She half expected Ghost to be gone, to have vanished into the mist like the specter she'd once thought him. But he was there, curled against the headstone, his flank rising and falling in the easy rhythm of deep, dreamless sleep. No twitching paws, no whimpering. Just an old dog finally resting. She checked her watch. 6:30 a.m. No movement. 6:45 a.m. Still asleep. When the cemetery gates opened at 7 o'clock, the groundskeeper approached, his eyebrows climbing. Damn, he's never slept this late. Rebecca knelt, her fingers brushing Ghost's side. He's not sleeping. Her voice cracked. He's off duty. It wasn't until Rebecca lifted Ghost into her car that she noticed. His collar was missing. Not fallen off. Removed. The frayed nylon ends were neatly cut, the tags left at the base of the headstone, arranged in a straight line like medals on a display case. And tucked beneath them, a slip of paper Rebecca hadn't seen the night before. Hayes's handwriting. Good dog. Not goodbye. Good. Because for soldiers like Hayes and Ghost, that was the only word that mattered. Ghost's recovery was slow. The vet had cleared him physically. His paws had healed. His weight was stable. His scars had faded to silver streaks against his dark fur. But in the weeks after Hayes's final voicemail, Rebecca noticed something unsettling. Ghost didn't sleep. Not truly. He'd close his eyes, sure. But his ears never fully relaxed. His muscles never went slack. Even in the deepest part of night, if Rebecca whispered, "Ghost?" his golden eyes would snap open, alert, focused, ready. Like he was still waiting for orders. One rainy Tuesday, she found him standing sentry at her bedroom door, his muzzle pointed toward the window, his body blocking the exit. "You're not on watch anymore," she murmured, kneeling beside him. Ghost blinked slowly, then turned and pressed his forehead against hers, a gesture so undog-like it stole her breath. He wasn't guarding the room. He was guarding her. Rebecca's first clue came at the VA hospital's physical therapy wing, where she'd gone to visit Javier Ruiz. Ghost walked beside her wheelchair, his posture looser than she'd ever seen, until they passed room 312. The door was ajar. Inside, a young Marine, both legs gone at the thigh, was struggling to transfer from bed to chair, his face slick with sweat and frustration. Ghost froze. Then, without warning, he ducked under the Marine's flailing arm, his body becoming a living crutch. The man gasped as Ghost's shoulder took his weight, his hands instinctively burying in the dog's fur. "Holy shit," the Marine breathed. He knew exactly where to." Ghost turned his head and licked the man's stump. Not a playful swipe, but deliberate, almost clinical. As if to say, "I know this pain. Let me help." The Marine burst into tears. Later, the head neurologist would explain, "K9s like Ghost? They don't just sense injury. They sense shame." That Marine hadn't let anyone touch his stumps in 6 months. Rebecca looked down at Ghost, who was now curled at the Marine's feet, his chin resting on the man's remaining shoe. A new mission had found him. The idea struck Rebecca at 3 a.m., scribbled on a napkin beside her 4th cup of coffee. A K9 therapy program. But not the kind with happy-go-lucky Goldens performing tricks. A battalion of broken dogs for broken soldiers. She started with 3 rescues. 1. Boomer, a Belgian Malinois with a missing ear, IED explosion in Syria. 2. Dozer, a pit bull mix with nerve damage in his hind legs, abandoned after failing, police training. 3. Luna, a skittish husky who'd chewed through her own tail, owner suicide. Ghost observed their first training session from atop a picnic table, his ears twitching at every command. When Boomer hesitated before climbing into a vet's lap, Ghost let out a single, sharp bark. Not a reprimand, but a reminder. You've faced worse. By week's end, the dogs had developed an eerie ritual. Every morning, they'd line up in front of Ghost for inspection, noses lifted as he sniffed each one. Every evening, they'd pile onto his dog bed, despite having their own, their bodies forming a protective circle around his. The staff called them Hayes's Howlers. Ghost just called them his. The program's first official day dawned icy and bright. 10 veterans, all amputees, all PTSD cases the hospital had labeled treatment-resistant, stood stiffly in the therapy yard. Rebecca held her breath as Ghost trotted down the line, his nose working as he paused before each soldier. Then the miracle happened. For Sergeant Lee, who hadn't spoken since Fallujah, Ghost dropped a tennis ball at his feet, then turned his back, an unspoken, "Throw it or don't. I'll wait." For Private Cortez, who panicked at touch, Ghost pressed his entire weight against the man's legs without making contact with his hands. For Major Collins, who'd tried to bite his last therapist, Ghost yawned dramatically, a canine peace offering. But it was Corporal Vance who shattered Rebecca. The youngest of the group, both arms tattooed with names of the dead, Vance had been caught trying to hang himself in the psych ward shower. Ghost took one look at him and rolled onto his back, exposing his belly, his shrapnel scars on full display. Vance collapsed to his knees, his hands hovering over the wounds. "They got you too, huh?" Ghost licked his shaking fingers. 2 broken soldiers. 1 silent understanding. The old farmhouse creaked in the Tennessee wind, its wraparound porch littered with chewed tennis balls and well-worn dog beds. Ghost lay curled before the fireplace, his breathing shallow but steady, his muzzle gone fully white. At 14, ancient for a German shepherd, His body was a roadmap of war. The jagged scar along his ribs from Kandahar, the stiff hind leg that never quite healed, the notch missing from his left ear where shrapnel had grazed him. Mrs. Hayes knelt beside him, her arthritic fingers combing through his thinning fur. "You stubborn old soldier," she whispered. "Still keeping watch, aren't you?" Ghost's tail thumped once, his version of "damn right." Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, dusting the azalea bush Hayes had planted decades ago. Ghost lifted his head, his clouded eyes tracking the flakes as they swirled past the window. Rebecca knew that look. He was seeing something, or someone. They couldn't. At 3:17 a.m., Rebecca woke to the sound of paws clicking on hardwood. Ghost stood at the foot of her bed, his posture impossibly straight for a dog who could barely walk that afternoon. Moonlight caught the silver in his fur, making him glow like the ghost he'd been named for. "Hey, buddy," Rebecca's voice cracked. "You okay?" Ghost didn't whine, didn't pace, just locked eyes with her, really looked at her, the way he used to when Hayes gave orders, then turned and limped down the hall. She followed him to the living room, where he circled the rug 3 times before lying down in his sentinel spot, facing the door, his back to the fire. Rebecca sat beside him, her hand on his side, feeling the slow, steady beat of his heart. "At ease, soldier," she whispered. Ghost sighed, a long, contented exhale, and rested his head on her knee. When Rebecca woke at dawn, her legs numb from hours on the floor, Ghost was gone. Not dead, just gone. No stiff body, no final gasp. Just an indent in the rug where he'd lain, still warm to the touch. And on the windowsill above, a single perfect paw print in the frost, facing east toward Arlington. 3 days later, Mrs. Hayes led Rebecca to the hayloft, where a young black and tan German shepherd dozed in a nest of horse blankets. "Meet Shadow," Mrs. Hayes said, her voice thick. "Last pup of Ghost's great-great-niece. Born the night he left us." Rebecca reached out, her fingers trembling, and Shadow latched onto her sleeve with needle-sharp puppy teeth, growling playfully. Mrs. Hayes laughed through tears. "Oh Lord, she's got his spirit." But when Rebecca lifted the squirming pup, Shadow suddenly stilled, her nose working overtime as she sniffed Rebecca's collar. Then, she licked the exact spot where Ghost used to press his forehead. Like she knew. Shadow's first trip to the cemetery was chaos. She peeled on every headstone, dug up a tulip bed, and stole a toddler's juice box before Rebecca could blink. But when they reached section 60, the pup froze, her ears pricking forward. Ghost's plaque read, "K9 Ghost, loyal beyond duty. 2009 to 2023. Shadow approached slowly, her tail tucked, her nose skimming the bronze. Then, she sneezed. Right on Ghost's name. Rebecca choked on a laugh. Yeah, he'd have hated all this fuss too. A gust of wind sent autumn leaves skittering across the grass. Shadow's head snapped up, her body quivering with the primal thrill of the chase. And she was off, barreling toward a group of kids playing frisbee, her paws kicking up divots of earth as she stole their bright orange disc mid-air. Rebecca watched her go, the weight in her chest lifting just a little. Ghost had carried the war with him every second of his life. Shadow would carry joy. 5 years later, the Hayes' Howlers program had expanded to 12 states. Shadow, now a certified therapy dog, led the newest class of rescues. Ranger, a 3-legged Doberman, improvised explosive survivor. Sarge, a deaf boxer, retired police K9. Lucky, a Chihuahua mix with PTSD so severe he'd once bitten a vet. They stood in a ragged line at Arlington, awaiting inspection. Shadow paced before them, her muzzle graying but her eyes sharp as ever. Rebecca held her breath as the dogs approached the row of plaques. Not just ghosts, but markers for every howler who'd passed. Boomer, 2019 to 2025. Healed with humor. Dozer, 2017 to 2024. Gentle Giant, Luna, 2018 to 2026. Finally stopped running. Each dog paused, sniffed, then marked the bronze with a single paw. Their version of saluting the fallen. Except Shadow. She trotted to Ghost's plaque, dropped the chewed-up frisbee atop it, and barked twice. Then bolted after a squirrel, her tail wagging madly. Rebecca shook her head, smiling. Some legacies weren't meant to be heavy. Some were meant to run free. Rebecca Myers sat at her cluttered desk, Hayes's final letter trembling between her fingers. The paper was brittle with age, the ink faded to a watery blue, but the words still burned. If you're reading this, I'm already gone. Don't waste flowers on my grave. Buy Ghost a damn steak instead. And when he's ready, because Lord knows that stubborn bastard won't quit until someone orders him to, tell him this. Mission complete. Stand down, soldier. I'm proud of you. She hesitated, then added the postscript Hayes's mother had found scribbled on a napkin years later. P.S. If he's still waiting by my grave at 6:30, tell him it's okay to rest now. Rebecca snapped a photo and uploaded it to the Hayes's Howlers Facebook page with a simple caption. Some bonds outlast war. Mission complete. Then she turned off her phone and took Shadow for a walk, bracing for the usual handful of likes from fellow vets. She had no idea the storm she'd just unleashed. By midnight, Rebecca's inbox had crashed twice. 6:02 p.m. A Navy SEAL posted a photo of his retired combat dog lying beside the Vietnam Memorial Wall. Caption: Bronze star says Hero. Dog tags say Rex. But tonight, mission complete. 7:45 p.m. A firefighter in Texas shared a shot of his search and rescue German Shepherd asleep atop a fallen colleague's boots. The hashtag scrawled in Sharpie on her paw. 9:30 p.m. The official U.S. War Dogs account retweeted a thread from a Marine in Okinawa, where strays gathered nightly at the K9 Memorial Statue, all sitting at attention at exactly 6:30 p.m. local time. But it was the video from Arlington that shattered Rebecca. A young soldier, maybe 19, his dress blues still crisp, kneeling at Ghost's plaque. He placed a chewed tennis ball beside the dozens already there, then pressed his forehead to the stone and whispered something. When he stood, his sergeant handed him a leash. At the other end, a three-legged Malinois with Ghost's exact golden eyes. The caption read, K9 Ajax, retired IED detector. Lost his leg in the same blast that took his handler. Today, he chose a new mission. Mission complete. Rebecca watched it 11 times before she noticed. Every evening at 6:30 p.m., the timestamp read, just like Ghost. As the hashtag went global, an eerie pattern emerged. In London, a Labrador mix at the Animals in War Memorial began circling the monument 3 times each dusk. At the tomb of the unknown soldier, a stray husky had taken to sleeping atop the marble slab, but only between 6:25 and 6:35 p.m. Even Shadow developed a ritual. Every evening, mid-fetch, she'd freeze, her ears swiveling toward some distant sound, before resuming play with extra gusto. Scientists called it canine collective consciousness. Veterans knew better. It was an echo of a dog who'd loved his soldier so fiercely, the universe itself couldn't forget. On the anniversary of Ghost's passing, Rebecca returned to Arlington at twilight. The plaque was buried under tokens, dog tags from every branch of service, a child's drawing of a silver dog guarding a smiling soldier, a sealed bag of bacon, still warm, from the 75th Ranger Regiment's mess hall. But it was the envelope tucked beneath a toy soldier that stole her breath. Inside, a single sheet of notebook paper, the handwriting unmistakably young. Dear Ghost, my dad was in the 75th too. He says you're the reason he came home. I never got to meet you, but I named my puppy Shadow because Mom says you taught yours how to be brave. Tonight at 6:30, we'll both sit by the window and howl for you. Love, Danny." "Yes, really." Rebecca pressed the letter to her chest, laughing through tears. Some stories didn't end. They multiplied,